Guys, let's talk about what's happening at the Atlanta airport now. A quiet morning reported there. Some good news, especially since this past week we saw a lot of chaos. It was being described as a flightmare here. So conditions at Hartsfield-Jackson appeared calm and operating normally this morning and even yesterday, even as this ongoing government shutdown continues to impact staffing levels and create uncertainty for travelers, for you all. Passengers reported on social media short lines and smooth experiences early yesterday, which is a contrast to the long wait times that we've been seeing throughout the recent weeks. Despite these relatively quiet conditions, officials do warn the situation remains unpredictable. If you go to the TSA website, the TSA security wait times website for Atlanta, it's still advising travelers to allow at least 4 hours or more for domestic and international screenings. So just something to keep in mind here. Officials still saying this situation remains unpredictable. Some people describing it like a box of chocolates because you don't know what you're going to get. But DHS says about 40% of TSA workers in Atlanta alone have called out during this shutdown, while other workers continue working without pay. ICE agents have also been assisting with ID checks and crowd control this past week. I don't know if they're still there this morning, but we know that they were deployed to airports across the nation, including here in Atlanta this past week. Union officials for TSA say the financial toll on workers remains severe, and more than 3,500 TSA agents reportedly called out of work just on Friday across the nation. This is according to the Department of Homeland Security. But some good news for TSA agents here. They are expected to get paid starting tomorrow. President Trump has signed an executive order. He did this on Friday. It authorizes payments to TSA agents. Trump told DHS to redirect funding to pay TSA employees, and it has been reported that the money will come from last summer's One Big Beautiful Act. A message was sent to TSA workers to tell them that they will be paid what they are owed for pay periods 3, 4, and 5, and employees should expect most of their back pay and their direct deposit starting March 30th, which is tomorrow. The message also told employees that they were all expected to return to work yesterday. We do know roughly 60,000 TSA employees went without pay during this government shutdown, including transportation security officers. And during this time, numerous organizations and businesses across Metro Atlanta and across the nation have stepped up to help TSA workers by supplying food and other assistance. Tyler Perry, he was one of those who pitched in, reportedly donating $250,000 in Visa gift cards to TSA employees at Hartsfield-Jackson. His team reportedly gave these gift cards to a TSA leader on Friday to distribute to individual workers. And we also know that in airports across the nation, donation boxes have been set out to help TSA workers. So what's next here for DHS funding? Because, we're still in that partial government shutdown. So let's talk about what's next for the Department of Homeland Security. The House and Senate did pass legislation on Friday to fund the Department of Homeland Security, but it was not the same piece of legislation. So DHS remains shut down. The Senate will meet for a pro forma session tomorrow morning. This is typically a brief few-minute meeting of the U.S. Congress, House, or Senate, where no legislative business or voting takes place. They serve as a legal formality to satisfy the constitutional requirement that neither chamber adjourns for more than 3 days without the other's consent. So House Speaker Mike Johnson is hopeful Senate Republicans can pass a CR by unanimous consent. Again, there's usually no business conducted during these pro forma sessions. Democrats are likely to send a senator to object the motion. And staying on the topic of DHS, a leader there recently resigned. We're speaking of Corey Lewandowski. He was a government employee who worked closely with President Trump, and he departed the Department of Homeland Security after Kristi Noem's firing. So Lewandowski no longer works at the department. DHS confirmed this in a statement on Friday. He served as an unpaid advisor to Kristi Noem and was President Trump's campaign manager in 2016. Now, Lewandowski started working as a political advisor to Noem when she was South Dakota's governor, so he's been in her corner for a while, and he lobbied for Trump to name her as DHS chief. Trump, as we know, fired Noem earlier this month and later named her as a special envoy for Western Hemisphere security issues. No further details have been provided regarding the reasoning behind Lewandowski's departure or if he will have any future government roles.